Buddhism for Today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma, Chapter 3, A Parable. Shariputra's Acknowledgement and Remorse. In the previous chapter, Shakyamuni Buddha first declined to explain his high appraisal of skillful means, telling Shariputra, "That is enough, Shariputra, I should say no more." After Shariputra sincerely asked the Buddha 3 times, however, Shakyamuni finally agreed, clearly explaining the one Buddha vehicle, skillful means, and the relationship between the two. The moment Shariputra recognized the indispensable value of skillful means as an entrance to the knowledge inside of the Buddhas, his heart leaped for joy with the ecstatic knowledge that the entrance to the Buddha's true awakening was open for him to jump through. Shariputra immediately stands, places his palms together, and, gazing reverently at the honored face, addresses the Buddha. "I am so grateful to the world-honored one. Hearing you explain this teaching just now, my eyes were opened for the very first time. What a slouch I have been. Before, when I heard these kinds of teachings from the Buddha, I saw him continuously giving assurances of Buddhahood to the Bodhisattvas, but not to me, or the other Shravakas. It hurt me deeply. And then I wondered, will I end my days having never discovered the wisdom of the Buddha for myself? When alone in the mountains or forest, sitting beneath a tree or walking around, I always felt dejected, brooding. I have heard the Buddha's teachings just like these bodhisattvas, and even realized them to a certain degree. So why does the Buddha explain to me only the lesser vehicle teachings? It was entirely my fault, however, that I became frustrated and wallowed in self-pity. It was my misunderstanding. During my study of the teachings, the Buddha would certainly have guided me to the great vehicle, revealing to me the knowledge that by persevering on the Bodhisattva way, I could attain the awakening of a Buddha. But I did not understand that the Buddha uses various methods of expounding the Dharma, teaching appropriately in response to the person and in accord with the circumstances. Failing to recognize those skillful means as such, I immediately believed and accepted the Buddha's teachings on first hearing them, but mistakenly took that as the realization of awakening. Then, when I saw the Bodhisattvas receive assurances of Buddhahood, but not me, it caused me to spend whole days and nights in self-reproach, reviling myself as unworthy. But today, my eyes are open for the first time. I truly know that I am a child of the Buddha, and it has made me feel like a new person. The supreme teaching that comes from the mouth of the Buddha has transformed the way I see the world. I have attained my share of the Buddha Dharma, and am now able to join the Buddha's work of teaching and transforming living beings. I am truly grateful to you." After addressing these words to the Buddha, Shariputra speaks again in verse in order to reiterate what he has said, acknowledging his past failings and expressing remorse for them, revealing his innermost thoughts to the Buddha and the gathered assembly. Shariputra's assurance of Buddhahood. The Buddha is thoroughly pleased by Shariputra's words and says to him, "Shariputra, your realization of what I have just disclosed to you is excellent. If you persevere this state of mind in ages to come, serve countless numbers of Buddhas with gratitude, and continue practicing the true Dharma without abandoning it, you will certainly attain Buddhahood." Shakyamuni Buddha continues this assurance of Shariputra's future Buddhahood in detail, bestowing the title by which he will later become known, Radiant Blossom Tathagata, and foretelling the name of his Buddha land, free from impurity. Shakyamuni also gives the title, Adorned with Magnificent Gems, to the era when this Buddha will appear. Assurance of Buddhahood is a term that will appear frequently in the following chapters. Its recurrence, however, should not be taken to mean that Shakyamuni Buddha gives this assurance lightly, or that we can become Buddhas without making any effort. I believe that religions can sometimes lose their way when they begin to teach that one can be reborn in heaven or paradise by merely reciting a certain formula or incantation. If this were all, it would not be so harmful. But sometimes religions even go so far as to teach that no matter the extent of people's evil deeds, they can be saved by purchasing something like a talisman. When religions operate at this level, they may become objects of contempt, causing many to turn their backs on religious practice. The true liberation that the Buddha taught is not such an easy matter. We must not only study the teachings of the Buddha, but also master them by putting them into practice ourselves. Moreover, we cannot fully achieve our own liberation until we have brought happiness to other people and benefited them through the Buddha's teachings. The teachings of the Buddha are not cryptic or enigmatic. They agree with both reason and common sense. The hearts of all those gathered in the great assembly leaped for joy when they see Shariputra receive his assurance of Buddhahood, and they pay homage to the Buddha, revering him from the bottom of their hearts. The beings of the heavenly realm also pay homage to the Buddha with offerings of beautiful fluttering robes and rains of white celestial flowers. All of them speak in verse, announcing their own conviction that they, too, will certainly become Buddhas. The heavenly beings pay homage to the Buddha with offerings because all beings are disciples of the Buddha. In other words, because all things are given life by the universal truth, the hearts of all living beings are filled with admiration for truth and naturally embrace it when they discover it. In everyday terms, we tend to think of heavenly beings as people who live in paradise in a metaphorical sense. They have little in the way of hardship or anxiety, and apparently no need to listen to the teachings of the Buddha. But this is not the case. As already discussed, constant development and progress is the ideal way of life for all living things, and beings in the heavenly realms are just like the rest of us. They will never experience true joy unless they are inspired by the superlative teachings of the Buddha. Moreover, in order to feel this true and lasting joy, they must also continually practice good for the sake of the people of our world, known in Buddhism as the Saha world, or world of endurance. This is one of the profound insights of Buddhist thought. The idea that once one has left this world behind for a paradise, they can lead a leisurely, carefree life, is nothing but a shallow, popular belief. Next, Shariputra addresses the Buddha once again. World-honored one, I no longer have any doubts or regrets. I understand it clearly. I have also received a personal assurance of Buddhahood directly from the Buddha. Many of the practitioners here, however, have already eliminated their delusions and have heard the Buddha say, "My teachings can free your mind from the influence of all the changes of the world and give you the power to extinguish your suffering and delusions." These practitioners assumed they were enlightened because they were free from delusion. Yet now they hear the world-honored one telling them that their realization is not full awakening, and that they cannot attain it unless they develop the compassionate mind of the Bodhisattva and persistently devote themselves to the needs of others. This teaching you have just given is significantly different from what they have heard from you before, so they are all perplexed and have fallen into doubt. World-honored one, please explain this more thoroughly to remove these doubts and misgivings from their minds. Then the Buddha responds to Shariputra, as I have already explained, the Buddha uses various examples, parables, discussions, and logical reasoning to expound the Dharma appropriately in response to the person and circumstances, resulting in the appearance of differences in the depth of the various teachings of the Buddha. The intention of the Buddhas is one and only one, however, to lead all living beings to the awakening of a Buddha. To reiterate, although the various teachings of the Buddha appear to differ in form and content, ultimately all of these teachings are for the purpose of liberating those who aspire to realization and work toward that goal, and thus all teachings arrive at the same conclusion. Shariputra, let me employ a parable to clarify this point, because most people will no doubt be able to understand this teaching through an allegorical story. The Buddha then tells the parable that follows. The parable of the burning house. There was a distinguished elder residing in a particular town in a certain country. He was advanced in age and incredibly wealthy, owning many fields and houses. He also employed many attendants and servants. His house was exceedingly spacious and grand, but there was only one single entrance. Many people were living there, but on closer approach, one could see that the earthen walls of the house's chambers were crumbling. The partitions between the rooms were old and decayed, its pillars were rotten at their bases, and the roof beams and rafters leaned so precariously that the building looked as if it could collapse at any moment. Suddenly fire broke out in the house, with flames simultaneously exploding upward on all sides and enveloping the building in a raging inferno. The house was not empty, however. It was filled with the elder's many children, whom he absolutely adored. The elder was outside the house, but as soon as he noticed that a fire had broken out, he hurriedly returned and was horrified to discover that his children were still inside, absorbed in their games and play. Despite the impending danger, his children took no notice of the fire. They did not comprehend the danger they were in, nor were they alarmed or frightened. They were so lost in play that even when the flames had come close enough to singe them with its searing heat, the children still felt no need to escape the house. Realizing the danger of this frightening scene, the elder instantly thought, I am strong enough to pick up all the children and wrap them in my robes, or set them on this table and haul them outside the house all at once. But on second thought, the elder realized, the house has just one doorway, and it's small and narrow. My children are too young to understand that they can escape only through this single doorway. They will certainly be burned alive because they are lost in play. So the most important thing for me to do is something to make them recognize how frightening the fire is. All of you, get out right now because the house is on fire." Although the elder's single-minded concern for his children made him do all that he could to convince them, no matter how dangerous the situation became, the children would not heed the elder's warnings. Neither panicked nor even startled, they felt no need to escape. They could not even distinguish the fire from the house, and they failed to understand the consequences of what they stood to lose. Oblivious to all this, they simply ran to and fro in play. Occasionally they glanced at their father, the elder, and noticed that he was saying something, but they did not make a serious effort to catch his words. Then the elder finally had this idea. "This house is burning up in a great inferno. If I cannot rescue the children from the house, they will certainly get burned alive. I will have to use some skillful means to rescue them from harm, because no matter how many times I yell to them to get out, they just ignore my warnings. I know the children have always loved toys. If I tell them something about toys, that will definitely get their attention." The elder then shouted to his children, "Your favorite playthings, goat carts, deer carts, and ox carts, are waiting outside the gate for you. I'll give you whichever you want, so get out of that burning house and come right here at once. These toys are very precious and rare, so if you don't come out to get them right now, you'll be sorry later. Get out of that burning house and come here quickly to play with these toys you love so much." When the children heard their father talking about their favorite toys, they all began scrambling to get ahead of one another as they came racing out of the burning house. Relieved at last, the elder's heart was filled with joy when he saw that all his children had safely escaped the burning house and were sitting together in the open space at the crossroads, eagerly awaiting the toys he had promised. The children then all looked at their father and began impatiently pleading, "Father, please give us the goat cart, the deer cart, the ox cart that you promised us." The elder responded to their requests and, treating all his children equally, he gave each of them a great white ox cart, far more wonderful than any of the 3 carts he had originally promised. Meaning of the parable. Obviously, the elder corresponds to the Buddha. The dilapidated house indicates the precarious and wretched state of the Saha world and the human mind. The Buddha is outside the house of humanity's miserable confusion, but the Buddha never forgets his children, all living beings, who remain in such a state. This is the most important message of the parable. The dangers of the Saha world are also graphically expressed in the description of the dilapidated house, and the initial lines of the last verse in chapter 3 vividly depict the sordid state of the human mind. It is overrun with all sorts of wild animals, birds, and creepy insects. It is stinking with the stench of excrement and urine, overflowing with filth, and infested by dung beetles and worms. Foxes, wolves, and jackals snap at and trample one another to devour the bodies of the dead, scattering their flesh and bones all over. On the heels of these creatures come packs of dogs. They skulk about, gaunt with hunger, roving for food everywhere. No sooner have the dogs arrived than Kumbanda demons spring up and, seizing the dogs by their feet, torture them just for their own amusement. This passage is the perfect allegory for the human world in the age of the decline of the Dharma in which we all live. The fire that breaks out in the middle of this confusion symbolizes all human sufferings, including aging, illness, and death. Living beings, deeply engrossed in sensual pleasure and material satisfaction, are unaware that sooner or later these sufferings will befall them, much less that they are imminent. The Buddha wants to coax people out of the burning house, but as we have seen, it has only one doorway, and it is so narrow that people cannot fit through it easily. There is just one clear path to liberation, but it is a narrow exit that is not passable without difficulty. This element of the parable teaches us the critically important point that there is but one truth, and it cannot possibly be attained through a half-hearted approach. The elder first considers setting all his children on a bench or table and using his great strength to haul them out of the burning house. This impulse can be interpreted to mean that, instead of leading living beings to practice the way through the power of their own individual efforts, commonly referred to as self-power, out of his boundless compassion, the Buddha initially considered rescuing people himself, allowing people to rely completely on his transcendent powers. To rely totally on the Buddha's powers without making one's own efforts is called other power. But even if the Buddha desires to use his transcendent powers to liberate them, inasmuch as living beings are too absorbed in the pleasures of the senses and material things, there is always the danger that they will fail to hold on to the liberating hand reaching out to them. The Buddha's compassion is ineffective unless living beings first awaken to it themselves. This is why the Buddha purposely refrains from using his transcendent powers to immediately liberate people. When we consider this a bit more carefully, we eventually conclude that if the Buddha were to simply carry all living beings straight away to awakening from the very beginning, because of their captivation with sensual and material pleasures, living beings lacking any understanding of the teachings would only end up falling by the wayside somewhere along the path. Instead, the Buddha guides living beings to liberation, beginning with the first step of realizing the ugliness and terror of the Saha world. In spite of the Buddha's compassion for them, however, living beings glance only occasionally at their father, representing the teaching of the Buddha, never considering how this Dharma relates to their own lives, nor are they willing to listen to the teachings and wholeheartedly accept them. We all know from experience that Shakyamuni Buddha's descriptions in this passage reflect the psychology of the average person. Finally, as a last resort, the Buddha shows living beings the goat carts, Shravaka vehicle, deer carts, Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, and the ox carts, the Bodhisattva vehicle, and for the first time living beings take an interest in the Buddha's teachings. Hearing the Buddha tell them they can choose whichever of these meets their fancy, living beings come running out of the burning house with the images of the attractive playthings that await them etched on their hearts. The words etched on their hearts means that these living beings have already developed either the Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, or Bodhisattva state of mind. Running out of the house indicates some degree of efforts to practice the Buddha's teachings that each has made by the time they pass through the entrance. This is why living beings are capable of escaping the wretched burning house, once they remove the illusions that plague their minds. Just like these children, although living beings have already emerged from the entrance, they do not yet realize that they have been liberated from the burning house. The only thing on their minds is the desire to obtain one of these carts they have envisioned, the awakening of the Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, or Bodhisattva. Accordingly, each child asks the Buddha for one of these carts, for the type of awakening they seek, because their minds are entirely set on the object of their desire. But then something unexpected occurs. Breaking through the state of preoccupation with their own preferred type of awakening, they suddenly discover the supreme teaching of the one Buddha vehicle, the great white ox cart, shining brightly beyond the enlightenment of the three vehicles. In actuality, this is the cart that the Buddha wants to give living beings. So he grants the same wonderful treasure unsparingly and equally to all those who have reached this state. What an unspeakable joy that all living beings can equally attain the Buddha's enlightenment. This is the quintessence of the Lotus Sutra. After telling the parable of the burning house and graciously explaining its meaning in detail, the World Honored One speaks in verse, telling the parable again in different words. These lines of the verse include some particularly important points and thus deserve a detailed examination. Directly quoted from the Threefold Lotus Sutra, the passage is as follows. I say to you, Shariputra, that I am also like this. I am the most honored of all sages, a father to the world. All living beings are my children, but they are firmly attached to worldly pleasures, and their minds are without wisdom. There is no safety in the threefold world. It is just like the burning house, full of all kinds of suffering, and is truly to be feared. Ever present are the distresses of birth, aging, illness, and death. These are fires that burn unceasingly. The Tathagata has already freed himself from the burning house of the threefold world to live in tranquil seclusion in the safety of the forest plain. Now this threefold world is all my domain, and the living beings in it are all my children. But now it is filled with disaster and trouble, and only I am able to rescue and protect them. The following is the gist of the Buddha's words. Listen to me, Shariputra. The Buddha's standpoint is exactly the same as the elders in this parable. I am the greatest of all the enlightened beings, and the father of this world. All living beings are my children. My children are strongly attached to worldly pleasures and do not possess the wisdom needed to realize the ultimate reality of all things. So I am ready to liberate them. There is truly no safety for ordinary people in the threefold world. It is just like the burning house, full of all kinds of suffering, and hence something to be extraordinarily feared. The various human sufferings, including birth, aging, illness, and death, as well as all manner of worries and troubles, raise incessantly like the flames of a fire. Since long ago I have been free of the threefold world of delusion, abiding in peace and tranquility, unaffected by worldly troubles and misfortune. But I cannot, for even a moment, forget the living beings who remain in the threefold world. Because the threefold world is all my domain, and the living beings in it are all my children. But this threefold world abounds in all manner of distress and suffering. I cannot help rushing back to this world of suffering to liberate my children, for I am the only one who can rescue and protect them. All living beings are my children. Now this threefold world is all my domain, and the living beings in it are all my children, and only I am able to rescue and protect them. What bold words of confidence the Buddha speaks, yet how full of great benevolence and compassion. But because the teachings of the one vehicle leads all to Buddhahood, it should be obvious that the meaning of I here is not confined to Shakyamuni, the manifest Buddha who lived in India some 2,500 years ago. I here refers to Buddha in the sense of anyone who has realized the truth. The Buddha's words are a grand declaration that, for all those who have realized the truth, the entire universe is their domain. Even when we, who still fall short of the awakening of Shakyamuni, close our eyes in silence, still our minds, and contemplate, all the universe is my domain, we experience the ineffable vastness of space and feel an inner peace. As a matter of fact, the very moment we visualize a planet some hundreds of millions of light years away, it instantly appears within our mind and becomes a component of our own experience. When we envision things that happened tens of thousands of years ago, or imagine things that will happen tens of thousands of years in the future, they become part of our mind, and we realize that even spatially and temporally distant phenomena are contained within the world of today. Our minds allow us to transcend time and space and expand our experience to infinity. If only we could realize universal truth just as Shakyamuni did, becoming one with the great life force of the universe, the truth that permeates all phenomena, this world of ours would truly become our own domain. This is not a matter of asserting a sense of ownership. No, it is quite the opposite. This is an experience of merging with the entire universe. In other words, it is the realization of non-self, the abandonment of the small self and discovery of the big self that receives the gift of life and is sustained by the entirety of all existence. When this happens, our small self steadily expands to fill the whole universe. Non-self is the only way we can reach the state in which all the universe is our domain. When we attain this experience, our minds are free, no longer captivated by anything, and even when we act according to our own wishes, everything we do and all that we create enhances the lives of others. This is nothing less than the activity of Buddhas. Although we cannot jump directly to this level, we have to aim for it by emulating the Buddha. Unless we begin by following his example, the skillful means of imitation, we cannot attain the true mind of the Buddha. Reciting the sutras, listening intently to Dharma talks, pondering these quietly within ourselves, and devoting ourselves to the service of others are all practices for abandoning the small sense of self and becoming one with the entirety of all existence. This is the spirit of harmony. If we uphold these practices by consistently undertaking them for even an hour a day, step by step we will move toward the Buddha, and, by persevering in them, we too can become Buddhas someday in the future. When we fully understand this truth, a great feeling of joy wells up from the bottom of our hearts. We must immediately abandon our sense of inferiority that convinces us that we cannot possibly attain Buddhahood. Why must we overcome this mentality? The necessity of doing so will make perfect sense after we read the next chapter of the Lotus Sutra, Faith and Understanding. The 14 Denegations of the Dharma and Divine Retribution. In the verse that concludes this chapter, the Buddha lays out guidelines for expounding the sutra to others and explains what kind of consequences we can expect if we fail to follow them. Among these guidelines, the Buddha's caution, "Do not transmit the Lotus Sutra recklessly," is likely to be misunderstood. These words do not mean we should refrain from expounding the sutra to all, but that we should never teach it incorrectly, and must always explain the Lotus Sutra in accord with the intention of the Buddha. The Buddha tells us not to teach the Lotus Sutra to people who have the following kinds of mindsets, and describes 14 errors and faults that conflict with the ethos of the sutra. Here too, the Buddha is not saying that we should refuse to deal with these types of people. What the Buddha really means is that if we teach the Lotus Sutra to them before they first free themselves from such erroneous attitudes and faults, not only will it fail to benefit them, but it can even have the opposite effect. For this reason, we must take care in teaching the sutra. The 14 denegations of the Dharma are as follows. 1. Arrogance. To be so conceited as to think one understands what one actually does not. 2. Indolence. To be lazy or preoccupied with unnecessary things. 3. Attachment to views about the self, to be self-centered in all one's thoughts and actions. 4. Shallow discernment, to look at things superficially and not be inclined to grasp their foundation. 5. Deep attachment to the 5 desires, desire that entails captivation by pleasures of the senses and craving for material things. 6. Refusing to comprehend, to be irrational, interpreting everything in one's own way and failing to understand important issues. 7. Lacking in faith, to doubt the sutra because of skepticism or foolish ideas. 8. Frowning on the sutra, to be sullen and grimace in response to the teachings of the sutra, which is an expression of revulsion. 9. Harboring doubt, to question the truth of the sutra and vacillate in one's belief in it. 10. Slandering the sutra, to disparage the sutra by speaking ill of it. 11. Scorning goodness, to despise wholesome persons and actions, particularly people who receive and embrace, read, recite, expound, and copy the sutra. 12. Hating goodness, to hate people who practice goodness, particularly those who receive and embrace, read, recite, expound, and copy the sutra. 13. Envying goodness, to envy the practices of goodness, which are to receive and embrace, read, recite, expound, and copy the sutra. And 14. Begrudging goodness, to harbor grudges against those who practice goodness by receiving and embracing, reading, reciting, expounding, and copying the sutra. Next, the Buddha outlines the possible consequences of denigrating the Dharma. We must be very careful here to note that such eventualities are not punishments carried out by the Buddha. The Buddha does not have this kind of relationship with living beings. The Buddha cannot act counter to his mind of benevolence and compassion by doing things such as dispatching living beings to hells and causing them to be reborn as animals or with physical disabilities because, on the ultimate level, the Buddha is the universal truth that is everywhere and sustains all things in the universe. Therefore, who or what is it that inflicts the consequences of behavior on living beings? Obviously, living beings bring these consequences on themselves. Living beings' own delusions invite these repercussions. Delusions are often likened to a dark cloud that obscures our Buddha nature. But this cloud is in no uncertain terms the creation of our own actions. Living beings themselves cast this shadowy veil over their own Buddha nature. Our minds become shrouded in darkness because the light of our Buddha nature is covered and concealed, and all manner of unpleasant things happen to us. This is the punishment we have meted out to ourselves. If we blow away these dark clouds of delusion with the cleansing winds of wisdom, however, the light of our Buddha nature will instantly shine forth. There is absolutely no need to fear the Buddha. On the contrary, we must clearly understand the consequences of our actions and have unshakable faith that the original Buddha is the one who gives us the gift of life and sustains us at all times.